So the subject of the session is facilitating economic recovery. Since one of the principal ways of sustaining the present economic recovery is to continue to get Canada's fiscal house in order, I think one of the topics we're going to be talking about is reducing the deficit and debt as quickly as possible. So our first guest is Tony Clement, the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister responsible for FedNor. He's been a Member of Parliament since 2006 and has previously served on the front benches as both Minister of Health and Minister of Industry, and played a lead role in getting Canada's economy back on track after the most significant global economic recession since the 1930s. Within the federal government, he's chaired 5 different committees of cabinet and serves on the Priorities and Planning Committee chaired by the Prime Minister. And during his private sector career, he was a lawyer, a small business owner, and entrepreneur, and has had to meet payroll and achieve business targets, which is all the more important once he got into government. He's been involved politically since he was in his teens. During his 8 years in Ontario MPP, he held prominent cabinet positions, including Minister of Health and Minister of the Environment, and even worked with democracy development agencies like the National Democratic Institute in developing democracies such as Macedonia. On a personal note, I think my favorite Tony Clement moment was on February 22nd, 2004. I don't know if you remember this date specifically, Tony. But he was a candidate for the leadership of the newly formed Conservative Party of Canada, and I think we all remember who won that eventually. But he debated perhaps the greatest conservative mind of our generation, Belinda Stronach. On May 2nd, 2011, Mr. Clement was re-elected for a 3rd consecutive time. Shortly after his re-election, he was asked by the Prime Minister to take over the responsibilities as President of the Treasury Board. In this capacity, he will lead the development and implementation of a cross-government spending review, and this follows through on the government's commitment to Canadians to eliminate the deficit and continue to strengthen the economy. Minister Clement.
Thanks very much, Dan, and good morning. You're the survivors of last night's festivities, I'm sure. So welcome to, we didn't bring the dancing bears, so you're just going to have to generate your own enthusiasm, I'm afraid. And we were discussing with Preston what possessed him to slot me for the 8 a.m. Saturday morning slot. I want to, despite the rumors to the contrary, I did not kill his dog. Nor insult Sandra in some way that I'm not aware of. But I think Preston, you know, those who know Preston know that this is a perfectly logical thing to do, to have a session at 8 a.m. Saturday morning after a little bit of a festivity last night. And I'm just the recipient of his very strategic thinking. So thank you, Preston. And thank you, all of you, for taking the time to be here this morning for my presentation and hopefully a little bit of a discussion. I know that other speakers during this session have talked a little bit about their association with Preston, and mine goes back many, many years as well. And I can tell you, just from my perspective, he is an individual who not only cares about the overarching policy issues, but he's the kind of guy. He is a person who is there through thick and thin, and I just want to pay a bit of homage to Preston for being there for me and my family. You know, through it's easy when they're throwing the rose petals your way, not so easy when they're throwing the bricks your way. So if you know Preston the way I do, you know that he is that kind of individual, and I want to recognize that today. So please let's give him a little bit of recognition this morning. So today's topic is part of this theme of government that facilitates, which is obviously thematically what this conference is about this year. And it is, to me, part of the broader discussion of the nature of the relationship between citizens and their government. And my role is to lead us through something called facilitating economic recovery, which is something people care about these days. And but I think from the broader perspective, how government delivers and operates in this space tells us a lot about how citizen engagement occurs in the Canadian context. Now, My role is as president of the Treasury Board, and I think pretty well only Chuck Strahl knows what that means, being around the cabinet table is almost as long as I have now. And I can tell you that it's not easy to explain to people what a president of the Treasury Board is, although I think Dave Wilkins is here somewhere, I know, and Dave knows, probably knows this, but whenever I visit Washington, I mean, I've got the calling card extraordinaire, President and Treasury in my title. I mean, they think I rule the land, you know, so it's helpful if you're visiting Washington. Not so helpful in explaining to Canadians what I do. And the story I've been telling of late is the story of my first state trip as president of the Treasury Board with the Prime Minister. Was a few weeks after the May 2nd election. We were in Greece, and perhaps you've heard of that country. And the essence of the trip was to do a number of things, including, you know, obviously get a sense of the lay of the land in terms of the economic situation there. But as usually happens for these trips, there's advanced planning. So somebody from the Prime Minister's office, in this case, as he then was, Dimitri Soudas, went ahead of the trip and would do the organization, talk to the leadership in Greece to facilitate the trip. So Dimitri was over there, this is no word of a lie, and was having the discussions with his counterparts in the Greek Prime Minister's office and talking about Prime Minister Harper's trip, and explaining that Tony Clement, who is of Greek heritage on his father's side, will be along with the trip. And the Greeks were interested. Oh, well, great, what does Tony Clement do? And Dimitri replied, well, he's president of the Treasury Board. So the Greeks quite rightly asked, what's a president of the Treasury Board? To which Dimitri replied, well, before any cabinet minister can spend a dime of money, they've got to get approval of the president of the Treasury Board. And the Greeks said, wow, that's a really great idea. We should have thought of that years ago. Yeah, you should have. Anyway, so that's what I do. Obviously, and this discussion is taking place in a bit of a context, obviously, and I do want to rewind to a little bit of ancient history because it involves some of my past, as Dan mentioned, and some of what Preston Manning has been all about as well. And when Preston first came to Ottawa as an elected MP, leader of the Reform Party, one of the main causes he fought for was to make government a better servant of the people. Back then, actually starting in the 80s, Preston envisioned an altered role for government. And it was a vision, let's face it, it was a vision born out of some frustration. Government was growing in size, growing in cost, growing in complexity. Taxes were high. Productivity within government was low. And deficits were either not tackled at all or else were met with even higher burdens on the taxpayers, that being the only conceivable solution. And really, when I think back, that's pretty well what drew me to politics even before that period of time as well. You know, it was the statist non-solutions of the Trudeau era that convinced me at an early age that what Canada needed most was freedom from the dead hand of government. And so when I decided to run for a seat in the Ontario legislature in 1995, it was, paradoxically perhaps, or ironically, to help counter the baneful effects of NDP Premier Bob Rae when he was NDP Premier. And sometimes we have to recall that era because it is now in the far mists of time. I think that's one of the things that Bob is counting on. At that time, when we were running for office in 1995, 1 in 10 Ontarians were on social assistance, and the province was losing 10,000 jobs per month. In fact, we had a couple of jokes. One of them was, you know, how do you create a small business in Ontario? You start with a big business and watch it shrink. it's kind of the gallows humor of the time. But out of the ashes of Bob Rae's Ontario was the Common Sense Revolution, in which I was a participant. During my time in the Ontario Cabinet, I, along with my colleagues like Ministers Baird and Flaherty, we did set to work to change all that, and I believe we made some progress. But at the same time that was happening, of course, Mr. Manning's leadership in the official opposition role in Ottawa, of course, he was saying the same things, facing the same challenges, working for similar ends, and I believe that his influence was what turned the debate around in this country about the need to have, political parties had to have a plan to spend within their means. This wasn't, I know it sounds trite now, but that really wasn't the political dialogue before Preston and his cohorts, his colleagues, started to talk about those things. And so when you think about government that facilitating economic recovery, the topic of this morning, to change the relationship between the government and the governed, to make a smaller government and a larger citizen, I think that is really what the dialogue has been about for a good number of years. We all realize that there's a role for government, but that also that Canadians are intelligent, entrepreneurial people, and that our ambitions and goals for Canada would be best met when the energy and dynamism of the people of Canada were encouraged to flourish freely and not be as restrained. We know instinctively and intuitively that our country was created through the hard work and sacrifice of countless people who rolled up their sleeves and made the Canada they envisioned, not by government decree or by a government policy of some department somewhere, but by their own individual and collective actions. And this isn't what perhaps our wonderful professors of history teach us, either in high school or in post-secondary. It perhaps is an alternate history of our country, but even though it's not in the standard text, I believe that it is based on valid evidentiary grounds. Over the decades, of course, it's true that we have seen the size of government grow, and inevitably the taxes have followed to feed it. But I guess my first point to make here, it's an obvious one for us, but it deserves to be repeated. That approach cannot continue unabated. Prime Minister Harper signaled this in his World Economic Forum speech in January, that a dynamic and growing Canadian economy will require governments at all levels to relearn to spend within their means and find a path to sustainable and relevant government services. Indeed, as our Prime Minister has noted, our choices as a country involve far more than a balanced budget. That is an element of a far larger discussion and dialogue that must take place. And really, ultimately, the question is whether Canada will develop the means to succeed in a world where, of course, the emerging economies are growing from an evidentiary basis at a far faster rate than a traditional OECD, European, and North American economies. So I'm not going to be talking about the 2012 budget to any great degree, of course. That will wait for Minister Flaherty on March 29th, but I guess I'll say something that has already been said by our Prime Minister and by the Minister of Finance, that budget is more than simply a document that deals with expenditures. It, of course, deals with our future path, about things like how do we develop our resources, how do we cut red tape, how do we continue to open new markets, how do we have long-term sustainability of cherished social programs, how do we support innovation and commercialization in the private sector. And so to the extent that it deals with these things, it is going to be a very important document. But how to change government, how to transform it to be a more sustainable and efficient and responsive entity, how to do so in the modern political setting. Well, I'd like to think that I can play a role in that. It's part of my responsibility, as well as others, in my role as President of the Treasury Board. And so when I was asked by Preston to speak here, he told me he wanted to have that theme of government that facilitates, and I immediately said yes. Number one, because you don't say no to Preston Manning, but also because it is something that I do feel passionate about. And I think that our current government, the Harper government, has made some progress on these fronts. And I'm going to talk about three of them directly related to my role in government, if you will. First, how we can make and how we have made government more open with important measures, including the Federal Accountability Act, as well as what I want to talk about, our Open Government Initiative. Second, how we're actively working to cut red tape and to ease the burdens on businesses to help create jobs and operate more efficiently. And last but not the least, talking a little bit about tackling the deficit, but in a different way, not talking about the budget as the important document that it is, but talking about it from a wider context. So first, open government. Open government is important because it assists Canadians to not only learn about, but also participate in government activities. It also has the potential, I put it to you, to fire up private sector innovation and entrepreneurialism by helping with the creation of new products using government data and information. Last spring, we launched Open Government through three main streams. First, there's open data. And open data is about offering Canadians government data in a more useful and usable format to reuse in innovative ways. There's about 271,000 data sets now available online. And why is that important for the private sector? What has that got to do with how we facilitate economic recovery? Well, when you have that data available, then it becomes possible to think about how to apply that in ways that are useful for the citizen. You know, when we are Canadians, of course, and we care about the weather. We love talking about the weather. Well, you know, where do you think the Weather Network gets its information? For your Weather Network app, it's through Environment Canada data. And they translate that data into the Weather Network app that we all, or most of us, kind of at least check once or twice a day to see how we can plan our trips or how we have to dress for the rest of the week or what have you. And that's a good example of the use of government data. A second example I like to use involves municipal government data. You know, around the world, around North America, I should say, if you want to go on to, you know, the Google Maps is one example, and you're searching for a way to get from one spot to another, Google Maps gives you three choices. You can take the walking choice, or you can take the car choice, but you can take, there's the icon for public transit. And the way Google Maps has the information for public transit is because every major municipality in North America you know, has an algorithm, has a data dump to their system with transit routes and bus times and subway routes and all of the things that are part of modern transit in most municipalities. And so that's another good use of government data that is available in an easy-to-use form, and some genius at Google Maps made the icon and made use of that. So, you know, access to this kind of data is important. It helps us develop new citizen-friendly ways to make our lives a little bit easier. And it's entrepreneurs that are firing that up. Open information is another stream. It's about proactively releasing information, including information on government activities, to, we believe, to a broader reach of Canadians on an ongoing basis. That's how we're moving on open information. And finally, perhaps most exciting for me, and I hope for you too, is open dialogue, giving Canadians a stronger say in government policies and priorities and using Web 2.0 technologies to expand citizen engagement within or with government. That is about tapping the ideas and talents of our citizens. And I believe by doing so, we can make government more responsive to their needs. In fact, earlier this winter, I held the first ever Twitter town hall in the federal government as part of our open government consultation. And as a result of that Twitter town hall, Canadians gave us some great suggestions. By virtue of just doing that, we were tearing down the walls between citizens and their government. It was 140 characters at a time, but it was a great way to have a conversation with citizens who were interested, engaged in the open government movement. And certainly I believe that this will occur more often in the future. I believe that dialoguing outside the everyday government box is crucial because government isn't the expert on everything. And we do have to solicit the input of our citizens because we want their engagement to make good decisions. We've got to keep them in the loop. The other aspect of this is how to engage them in a way that is meaningful. And that's where crowdsourcing comes in as a potentially new idea about open government. And crowdsourcing to me as a conservative is not just about saying to Canadians, we've got to make a decision as government, we'd like your input, let's get together and talk about it, and if you've got some views, we'll feed it into Bureaucrat X14, and Bureaucrat X14 will make a decision that'll come up the ladder to the Cabinet, and then the Cabinet makes the final decision. That's okay. It's nothing wrong with that, I guess. But to me, the exciting part of crowdsourcing is, can we, as a result of making the revolutionary statement that with the appropriate information, citizens then have as much information as Bureaucrat X14 has, can we actually step government back and say, look, we'll give you the data. You're all sentient beings. You decide. If you need some help implementing, we'll help you implement, but really it's a decision of the citizens. And that to me is the exciting aspect of crowdsourcing. Really opening up government, infusing with citizenry their roles and responsibilities, and government gets to step back. I think that is a liberating but also a conservative kind of approach to these things. So I'm hoping to make some ground on these things for open government, and I think it fits really well with this theme of facilitating not only economic recovery, but government facilitating that we have been on about, that the Manning Centre has been on about. This is actually a means to an end that we should approach. Second, let me talk a little bit about freeing business to succeed, cutting red tape. Obviously, a government that truly facilitates is a government that ensures the people, the businesses, the communities in Canada have the tools they need to succeed. And cutting government red tape, we intuitively know, frees businesses to grow, which ultimately benefits everyone in Canada. Now, Canadian Federation of Independent Business has estimated that the cost of red tape costs Canadian businesses up to $30 billion a year. Now, how is that possible? Well, time, energy, away from business, away from productivity, away from creating wealth to fill out the forms in triplicate. That's how that happens. And therefore, it impedes our economic productivity. As I said, as a former small business person myself, involved in 2 startup companies before I got elected to Parliament, I know how much these forms and this burden takes up precious time and resources, and in essence curbs the entrepreneurial spirit. So cutting red tape helps businesses focus on what they do best, sustaining the economic recovery by creating jobs and generating wealth. It also spurs innovation by leaving a clearer regulatory picture for entrepreneurs and a marketplace that is more welcoming and easier to understand. Now, Prime Minister Harper realized this a while ago. He set out to realize all of these benefits when he set up the Red Tape Reduction Commission. And as a sign of our commitment to that approach, I recently announced that we are taking action to implement what is called a one-for-one rule to control administrative burden on business at the outset. This means that any new regulation will need to be offset by getting rid of an old regulation of greater or equal burden. There'll be some more announcements coming on how we intend to reduce this regulatory burden in other areas, but this is an important approach, not only because in and of itself it helps balance the field for small businesses, but, and I'm going to return to this theme, it starts to change the culture in Ottawa, in official Ottawa. So rather than how do we fix the problem by creating another regulation, you know, that's the sort of go-to place that happens too frequently. Official Ottawa is going to think, wow, you know, this is going to be a real pain because we have to find a regulation that we've got to now take out of the system of greater or equal burden. So maybe we don't really need to put this regulation before Treasury Board. Maybe we've got to find another way to solve this problem that doesn't involve a regulation. That's the culture shift you want to create in Ottawa. So I really do believe that this will help our businesses grow, help them invest in the future. And of course, this is not just a Government of Canada initiative. It's happening in other conservatively minded jurisdictions. And of course, we've got the other equally important goal of pursuing this kind of approach of cutting red tape with our largest trading partner, the United States of America. So we do want to have, within our space here in North America, a more efficient, more rational regulatory system. And I don't have to tell you, it's trite to say, let me just state it for the record, Canada and the U.S. are one of the largest trading partnerships in the world. 1 billion a day crosses the border. And it is a testament to our geographic circumstances, of course, but it's also indicative of our close ties, our mutual values, and the enduring legacy of peace and cooperation that free and open borders and our trade nurtures. But we have had a situation over the years, it accumulates, where rules become stale or redundant, and they can seriously get in the way of doing business cross-border. We don't want that. And that's why last year, Prime Minister Harper and President Obama announced the creation of the Regulatory Cooperation Council, RCC, and there is a joint action plan that's being developed to align our regulatory approaches in a range of sectors for both Canada and the United States. It'll make it easier for businesses on both sides of the border to do business, to increase trade, to create jobs and growth. And as President of the Treasury Board, I'm looking forward to overseeing these objectives and the RCC. I'll be reporting to the Prime Minister on a regular basis. Which brings me to my third and final point, you'll be pleased to know. Throughout our history, Canadians and their governments have learned valuable lessons from economic cycles. And of course, while stimulus measures are sometimes needed in particular situations, you know and I know, the iron law of economics apply to our country's economic health and welfare. That is to say, government overspending with no plan to balance leads to declining growth, higher taxes, and ultimately jobs lost to more competitive and healthier jurisdictions. Today, most Canadians understand the necessity of reducing the deficit for the reasons that I mentioned about the culture shift that we were able to do in the 80s and 90s on these issues. And they do want Canada, Canadians do want Canada to return to fiscal balance as soon as practicable, finding savings within government spending and taking targeted actions where necessary to promote the recovery. Now, last year, in the Part 2 of the 2011 budget, Part 1 was interrupted by a certain electoral event, but the one that followed the May election, well, so it was basically the same budget. we announced our plan to return to a balanced budget while keeping taxes low. That was our promise to Canadians. And we did launch our savings exercise, of course, and I was put in charge of a cabinet committee making some recommendations. And you'll see the results of that in Budget 2012. That's not what I'm here to talk about in terms of specifics, because that'll be talked about, I'm sure, as part of the ongoing debate on the budget in just a few weeks' time. But one of the things I learned out of that process is that this kind of review is not just about finding savings per se, although that is important. It is also a tool by which we can help to modernize government. And I came to a conclusion through this process that this effort to modernize government, to find a way to structurally spend within our means, should go beyond a singular event, like a budget. We have budgets every year, of course. But what I learned is we have to do more than rely on what I call just the one-a-year budget, or what I call the episodic strategic reviews that we've done. Of course, we have budgets every year, and for the past several years, we've also had these strategic reviews that involve finding savings, cost cutting in selected departments and selected government activities. I'm not saying that's bad, but really it is a top-down and to an extent an after-the-fact approach. It's difficult, nay, impossible, to get into every nook and cranny of expenditure in government this way. And believe me, there are a lot of nooks and crannies. But you might ask, okay, that's a good point. We've got to do this on an ongoing basis. But isn't that the day-to-day responsibility of the Treasury Board? Isn't that my job as President of the Treasury Board? And the answer to that is yes, you're right, but no, it's not as simple as that. Yes, in the sense that Treasury Board, which is a committee of Cabinet, is historically the place to review the particulars of departmental spending pursuant to a budget initiative or a Cabinet direction. That is true. But it doesn't go searching for savings outside of that mandate. Now, I'm not saying that we should carry on as business as usual. Indeed, what I'm saying is what we have to do at Treasury Board as the place where these discussions take place is to have greater tools and better governance to review these submissions in a more effective way. And certainly I'll be considering that in the days, weeks, and months ahead. But the more important take-home lesson is that we have to ingrain this idea of efficient and constrained use of tax dollars on a day-to-day basis at every level, from the politician all the way down to the proverbial mail clerk, i.e. to every level of bureaucracy. So if you take nothing else from my talk this morning, please take this. The real job that we have to accomplish is change the culture in official Ottawa from one of being spending enablers to one of being cost containers. What I'm saying is that everyone should get out, everyone in government, when they get out of bed in the morning, hopefully they're at least thinking, how do I do my job to the best of my ability to serve Canada and Canadians? I'm hoping that's kind of the bottom line if you're in the bureaucracy or in the political class. But, thank you, but can we also get each individual to ask themselves, how can I do my job in an excellent way, but at less cost to the taxpayers? That would be a real culture shift in this place. Now, how do you do that? Well, in business, we know that you change incentives and rewards. And by changing the internal governance and accountability that we feel at every level. So this is a real root and branch shift in collective thinking and individual thinking. I know that. And it will not occur overnight. But it needs signals like from politicians like myself or others, that this new thinking is both advantageous and necessary. You'll hear more from me about these reforms in the months ahead. But again, the take-home message that I want to deliver to you is that the budget is merely the start of my and our work in this regard. And we know we'll face resistance. We know that sustainable services by the right-sized public service, those should be uncontroversial goals, but we do have public sector union bosses, quite frankly, working hand in hand with the NDP opposition. And their goal is simply to perpetuate the status quo. Their only solutions seem to be hire more, tax more, spend more. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll agree with me, this is both irresponsible and unsustainable. And this stand-pat approach by the unions and the NDP, the public sector unions, will actually translate, this actually leads to mediocre public services at high cost to a frustrated public with empty wallets. So suffice to say, we've got to resist these non-solutions, even as they continue their well-funded campaigns. So let me conclude my remarks today by one final observation about our need for continued economic growth and jobs in these challenging times. Now, when you look around the world, runaway government spending, reckless borrowing, and unchecked deficits have thrown economies into turmoil and led some countries, as we know, to impose harsh austerity measures to try to stop the economic decline. We look around the world, already countries like the UK, France, Ireland, Italy, dare I say Greece, have imposed severe restraints, or will be, on all government spending for the next 8 years. Some other measures they've included, that they've taken include tax hikes, pension annulments, and slices taken out of critical programs like healthcare. For many countries, even that won't be enough. These cuts will leave their economies with debt-to-GDP ratios that are 4 or more times higher than Canada's. Over the years, Canadians have learned that chronic deficits are a mortgage on our future. Chronic deficits create higher taxes, less opportunity, and less freedom for our children and our grandchildren. Ultimately, they squander the opportunities that have been bestowed upon us in this blessed and special land. That's why we believe, as a government and as individuals, that we've got to stick to our plan of being a low-tax jurisdiction for jobs and growth, a plan that has worked and is already serving Canadians well. Now, if you're like me, you believe that Canadians can overcome any challenge. We always have, as long as we never lose faith in ourselves. I'm going to go back to Winston Churchill. When he addressed our Parliament during the bleakest days of the Second World War, he said, "We have not journeyed all this way across the mountains, across the prairies, across the centuries, because we are made of sugar candy." Friends, freedom, hard work, and sacrifice, they have got us to where we are today, and they will get us to where we need to go. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Minister. So our next guest who will be taking shots at the Minister is Bill Robson, who's the President and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute. He took over as President in 2006 after serving as the Institute's Senior Vice President since 2003 and Director of Research since 2000. He's written extensively on government budgets, pensions, healthcare financing, on inflation and currency issues. And being from CIBC, I was heartened to see that he was also an economist with Wood Gundy. He also serves as an advisor to or director of several education-related and public affairs organizations. And Ottawa's finances have been a focus of Mr. Robson's work ever since he joined C.D. Howe in 1988, and he has been the author of the Institute's Shadow Federal Budget since its inception in 2000. Mr. Robson.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Very good to be back at the Manning Center Conference and in a position to pay a compliment to Preston and his colleagues for such a superb event. When I got up this morning and heard my voice, the consequence of last night's fine event and having to talk over Rick, a very good band, I heard myself, and it reminded me of one of George Burns's lines about, yeah, nice to be here. At my age, it's nice to be anywhere. And I'm warming you up for some talk about pensions later when I mention that. It's an honor to share a platform with Tony Clement. I'm a bit concerned, though, about the sort of a power imbalance here. I mean, he's sitting comfortably in the armchair, but I'm the armchair critic. He's the guy who's actually got to run the show and deal with the complexity and the actual implementation, and I'm the guy who gets to sit back and say, do a better job. So I'm the professional nag who just gets to write the report card saying good, do better, and then I get applause for it. I think we have an applause line. Yes, we do. The subtext for this...
There's an app for that.
That's the subtitle for today's session. Yeah. So how hard was that, right? So anyway, so I want to hereby extend an invitation to you, Tony, at the C.D. Howe Institute's next annual general meeting. You can come and snipe at me for not doing a good enough job running that organization. Let me start off by saying, I'm going to get to the could do better, of course, because that's my job, but I do want to start with the not bad. The Canadian advantages that we talk about are real. We've done a lot of things right in the starting. You go back to the budget surpluses of the 2000s, and then stabilizing our social security programs, spending much less in sort of a panicky response to the crisis, and I think the recent move to fiscal restraint and the messaging from Tony and his colleagues is very good. And I want to make a related point that every country that's in fiscal difficulty has really sort of two very broad things they can do. You can work on the numerator of your problem, that's the debt that you're trying to get down, and you can work on the denominator, the income base, the GDP that helps you sustain that. And that's what Canada did when we last got out of trouble in the late 1990s. Both of those things moved in the right direction, which makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun. Now, Greece has already come up. I don't have Greek blood in me myself, although I do have one of my Greek in-laws. My children do have Greek blood, so they're in much better shape. I have a Greek in-law who's convinced that the Celts and the Greeks are related on account of bagpipes and a few other things, so there's some research to be done there. But my Greek in-laws, I hope, will forgive me for saying that Greece, like some others in Europe, can't operate on both those things. Growth can't do enough for them. They have a very dismal prospect ahead of sort of endless fiscal consolidation. In Canada, we are in great shape because we don't face that side of it only. We can work both on the fiscal consolidation and on the growth. So in my 45 minutes at the podium, I'm good. Just making sure the moderator's alert here. He's going to have to poke me. I do want to talk about the fiscal discipline side, but I do want to spend a moment, if time permits, on growth too, which is a bit more fun. Time may not permit, though, because here I get to wave the axe, and there's just so much to chop. A C.D. Howe Institute person must give a number. So let me give you a top-level one. If federal program spending were the same share of the economy now that it was 10 years ago, and I don't think anybody in this room recalls that 10 years ago we had a serious shortage of government in this country, then we'd be spending $45 billion a year less now than what we are. So that's even bigger than the red tape burden that the CFIB was calculating. It's about $5,000, more than $5,000 per family of four. Some of that was defense, about 1/7 of it. But for the rest of it, did we see value for that money? That's a rhetorical question you don't have to answer. I don't think we did. Why are we running so far ahead in what we're paying for relative to what we're getting? Well, a huge amount of it has to do with the compensation of government employees. You look at the non-uniformed personnel only, and over that decade, those costs rose about twice as fast as overall labor income did in Canada, just hugely outpacing the rest of the economy. And that was partly because cost per bureaucrat, I don't want to pick on bureaucrat X14, who's clearly important, So maybe that bureaucrat was worth it, but half again as fast as the earnings of the average Canadian, and the number of bureaucrats went up 3 times faster than overall employment in the country. And so there's no sign that the compensation isn't competitive. Now, program review is supposed to rein that in, and some of the latest numbers that we've seen are certainly moving in the right direction. But given how fat the fat years have been, Minister Clement and his colleagues certainly have their work cut out for them. We spend a lot of time thinking about the economy and the difficulties of getting productivity growth faster. So just to use the terminology of that debate, the unit labor cost of government services in Canada has gone through the roof. So that would be a very, very good place to start. There are lots of other things to talk about. Let me just highlight 2 rather quickly and then spend a moment on the compensation question again. Transfers to the provinces, a very large increase in dollars spent. And I just think that this is entirely wrong. It's not the direction that you want to go in a healthy federation where you want each level of government making its own case to its own taxpayers for the money it's raising and the quality of the programs that it's delivering. I do commend the federal government for having signaled an end to the clearly unsustainable increases in health-related transfers that were otherwise in prospect. But I don't think that simply reining in the rate of growth is the right idea. I think that over time those transfers should actually begin to disappear. And we can cut the GST a little bit more. Other taxes over time at the federal level give the provinces a little bit of a bit more room to do what they need to do and continue cutting the strings, as recently been the case. Crown corporations, not everybody's sort of wake up in the morning thinking about an issue, but they're effectively, I guess, over the decade, federal transfers to them have roughly doubled. About $10.5 billion a year, which is a lot of money by anybody's standard. And the Crown lenders are extending all kinds of credit, which seemed like a pretty good reaction when we were in the midst of the crisis. But at some point, you have to pull that in, because if you continually prop up non-credit-worthy borrowers with this type of financing, you get what is often termed zombie companies that continue to sort of lumber along, involving other creditors in their activities and creating more pain. Some of them have pretty big pension obligations they can't afford. You have to turn that tap down. You have to take that pain now, because it just gets worse the longer it goes on. Now, I did want to just spend a moment on pensions, since I'm sounding a bit like George Burns, and say that this is something that I very badly hope will be addressed in the budget. If you calculate what these things are really worth as opposed to what they're shown at on the books, if you ask what would it take the ordinary Canadian to build up a nest egg that could provide that kind of a pension income, the answer is that these federal government pensions are underfunded to the tune of about $250 billion. Again, a colossal amount of money by anybody's standard. It's about $30,000 per tax-paying family of 4, and it gets bigger all the time. As you can see, if you look around the world where other countries have big pension problems, when you talk about an unfunded liability, it sounds like something that's kind of off there in the distance. These things are turning into cash obligations at a very rapid rate as the leading edge of the public sector baby boom is retiring, well, taking early retirement. They're very expensive. The taxpayers who have to backstop them don't get anything like the same opportunities to save for their own retirement, thanks to government rules. So there's lots to do on both fronts. I think MPs have to start with their own pensions. They are very extravagant benefits. There is not 1 cent set aside to pay them. I've heard that there may be some changes to the MP's plan. I certainly hope that that's true, because the federal parliament needs moral authority to lead in this. When Tony was an Ontario MPP, there was a period when the Ontario legislators reformed their own pensions to a much better plan. I'm sorry they didn't take that opportunity to do something about the Ontario public service plans at the same time, but there are precedents for this. It's possible to do it, and it's highly necessary. Now, that was kind of fun talking about pensions and cuts. On growth, let me be a little quicker to make sure that we don't run over time. What I'd really like to underline is that a majority government with some scope to balance the budget without cutting into the meat and the sinew of what government does can get moving on some other things that have long-term payoffs. Tony mentioned open government. He mentioned the red tape reduction. Just let me mention EI reform. How about making access to that program and the benefits you get equal across the country so that everybody's treated the same wherever they live? A good idea, good for growth. Trade barriers, we talked a little bit about that, working with the United States in particular. Getting those barriers down, it's obviously good for consumers, but it's also good for producers. In the modern world, you can't export if you don't import. It makes sense to get rid of a lot of the obstacles that our businesses face when it comes to using Canada as their base to serve a market domestically or around the world. This government has done some valuable things on that front already. I would do it for a whole lot more of the things that we import. And this is very churlish of me because that fine magazine that we had in our packages when we came in had a back page ad from the makers of cartelized, they don't use that word, supply managed agricultural goods, eggs, milk, dairy. Those tariffs are deliberately set so high that nothing can come in. So there's a tariff you can cut and actually bring in more revenue. Talk about a win-win. So we should move on that. One final point about aging gracefully. I think the Prime Minister was entirely right in the Davos speech that Tony referred to raise the question as to whether or not we ought to be doing something about the age at which most Canadians start to take their old age security payments. I think that is entirely appropriate. It's all about facilitating growth. Because there are a lot of people, people say 70 is the new 65, at least. We have a larger than ever number of healthy, educated, motivated people who are getting to age 65. The next cohort will be even bigger, healthier, better educated, even than the baby boomers. So there is a lot of benefit to the economy if the people who are willing and able to continue to work, continue to save, continue to contribute, don't run into a great big wall of government programs and clawbacks that says, you're done. So I think it would be a great idea, for example, to let people, rather than taking the payment at age 65, defer, as you can with a Canada Pension Plan. Wait a little longer, get a richer benefit later. Saves the government money in the short and medium term, and also very good for the economy. There are a lot of other things I could say about the ages at which we assume people should stop saving, run down their assets, and so on. The Income Tax Act prescribes a whole bunch of things. There are other regulations that prescribe some other things. Time for all those ages to move up much higher or maybe even disappear. If 70 is the new 65, pretty soon it's going to be even higher than that. I should close on that note. Sounds kind of gloomy, but I was thinking about George Burns again cheering us up. He said, you should, once you got to age 100, you got it made. I mean, hardly anybody dies after that age. So let me leave you with that very encouraging thought that birthdays are good for you. The more of them you have, the longer you live. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Minister, and look forward to the discussion.
All right, thank you very much. So we've got time for a few questions. If anybody, we've got microphones set up. So this gentleman over here.
I think these are for you.
The CBC is about as fair and true to its mission to be equitable to both parties, and you're looking for government cuts, and the CBC is asking and receiving $1 billion a year or more, and the letter I got from the minister said, no, we're not going to cut the CBC. We used to have a national railroad, we used to have a national airline, we used to have national this, that, and the other thing. We have to get rid of this left-wing, prejudiced, terrible, evil thing living on government taxpayers' wallets. What can you do, Mr. Clement?
First of all, you got to stop beating around the bush and say what you really mean. I'm really not hearing exactly what you're saying. No, look, I think actually, I'm not sure what letter you received, but I think the Heritage Minister has made it clear that CBC is included in our Deficit Reduction Action Plan review, as are many other organizations within 67 different departments and agencies that are under the review that we have done. So that's all I can say right now. We have a budget on March 29th.
Sir?
Yes, I've got a question about a Buy Canadian policy, Mr. Clement. I don't know whether this is the right forum to ask it, but I'll give it a whirl anyway. If you don't have a Buy Canadian policy, you'll have the situation where, let's say we're buying some new frigates for the Navy, and all we do is to pop down to the nearest US shipyard and say, I'll have 6 of those, wrap them up, and I'll take them with me. That's obviously not a good idea for this country. If we have a rigid Buy Canadian policy, on the other hand, you get something like we had with Spar Aerospace, who developed the Canadarm, and they knew that all major government space programs were coming to them, so they didn't have to be competitive, and in the end they went the way of all non-competitive businesses, which means they got bought out. So the question is, does the government have any guidelines for how you apply a Buy Canadian policy, or is it a case of we'll think about it on an ad hoc basis?
It's more the, it depends on the context and the circumstance. So for instance, certain aspects of military procurement, it is true for every nation that is building its military that there are certain aspects of it where they demand that the procurement either have benefits for the national economy, or that it be located for construction nationally rather than internationally. So for instance, as I think Rana was here yesterday, she was talking about our shipbuilding strategy. It involves Canadian shipyards. It doesn't involve Korean shipyards, for example. So, and that is perfectly consistent with our trade deals that we have. Usually military procurement is ring-fenced or is an exception because of national interest, national security perspectives. So that is sort of outside there. The other, if I can extrapolate a little bit from your question, there are other aspects of the Canadian economy that have historically been ring-fenced, and now there is a growing debate. I think of my time as industry minister and the telecom sector, for instance, as being a case in point as to whether that is still serving in its exact form right now Canadian interests and the Canadian economy. So I think that debate is ongoing, and I would encourage you to watch closely as the Government of Canada deals with those issues in the future.
I wonder if I might just weigh in, because Ambassador David Dinkins is in the room. He and Wilkins, have been trying to get rid of some of the problems that arise as a result of local procurement policies on both sides of the border. We recently had an episode in the U.S. where some pipes that had already been put into the ground were torn out of the ground because they didn't meet the U.S. local content requirements. Total waste of time and effort for the U.S. taxpayer, a total disaster. So, you know, I think it's very easy for us to see when other countries have these policies in place that are shutting out our exports to them. It's very easy for us to see how counterproductive they are, how it interferes with their getting value for money. And of course, the same logic applies to us. So I would be working very hard to make sure that governments everywhere are getting the best value for money they can, regardless of where they're sourcing from.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so to keep us on schedule today, we'll have to finish up. But thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Robson. Appreciate it.